overall, my mothering journey is not anything I expected. It wasn't anything I envisioned. It wasn't anything I planned out on paper. And even through that journey, I had to make compromises, and I had to look at, like two roads, and which road am I going to take? Am I going to take the one where it leads nowhere? Or am I going to take the one and have an open heart that, it's okay that we're going to have two different donors, and it's okay that they're not going to have, fully related genetics. Like, it's okay. And we're just going to go down this path and see what happens. And again, being on the other side and seeing who they are and what they look like and how they act. I'm learning even more today that genetics is there's so much more to parenting, to being siblings. Like, they learn from each other. They learn from me every day. And it's a beautiful story that we have with our donors. And we talk about how important their role is in their life and who they are. But also how beautiful it is that I could still contribute to them through their day-to-day as their mother.
If you're considering using donor eggs to build your family, you may have some worries. In fact, they may keep you up at night because you're so worried about what your life will look like. Will your child be connected to you? Will you be connected to your child? How can you explain this to your child? How can you explain it to other people? There are so many worries and concerns that are normal, but very often people don't know many others who've gone through this. So today I'm going to help you by introducing you to someone who's been through it all and can share with you answers to those questions. She will not only satisfy you with these answers, but she will give you hope, and she will make you understand that you can use donor eggs to build your family and have a wonderful journey and have the family of your dreams. From our Building Your Family community, this is the Building Your Family podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Schumann, author, researcher, and reproductive medicine therapist. As the leading destination for support and education for people using reproductive medicine to grow their families, we cut through the noise to provide you with research-based information, effective and actionable strategies, and the support that you need to feel better so you can get into the driver's seat of your life and build the family of your dreams. We look forward to seeing you inside. Welcome back to a new episode of the Building Your Family podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. So often we are doing our best to try to get through life. And as we pursue parenthood with donor conception, it can be so difficult. And so we've had many reproductive endocrinologists and donor conceived people and embryologists and all sorts of people talking about their journey to try to help you understand how you can resolve some of the things that keep you up at night. And the person who can really help you most with that is someone who's been through it herself. So today I'm going to introduce you to someone who's been through it herself. She's got donor-conceived children through an egg donor. She had to process all of that, and she's done something really remarkable. She started her own foundation, which she can talk to you about. So she's met lots and lots of people who've gone through this as well, and she can help you understand how to kind of get through those milestones and arrive on the other side with the happiest life and the most wonderful family. So I'm very excited for you to meet Emily Patel. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I'm so happy that you can talk about all of these things because I think that there's so many people who use an egg donation and they don't know that many people who've used it. And so, as you know, not everyone's story is the same. And so it's really important for people to understand the viewpoints of lots of people so they can understand maybe some of the things that they're going through and also how they're dealing with things in the world. So maybe we can start with how you started down this journey and got to the place where you were choosing to use egg donation to build your family.
My journey started much earlier than I even realized. When I was 16, I started having hot flashes and night sweats and just not feeling like myself. And so my parents took me to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, she seems to be hormonal. She's 16, didn't run any tests, just said, let's put her on some birth control. That'll make her feel better. That'll make you feel better as the parents because she'll stop complaining and we should be good. So my parents didn't know much different than to just listen to what the doctor suggested. So
Right.
on birth control, I went at 16 years old. Although I should note, my dad was not very thrilled about that. He thought to himself, I'm not putting my 16-year-old on birth control. He was very conservative and was very concerned about that. And it was actually something we kind of went back and forth for a while because I said, I'm feeling miserable. Like, please just let me try this. And we did end up going down that path, but it is something to note because that was really his only holdup, was the concern of putting his child on birth control. And there was no education about what else could maybe be a reason why we wouldn't want to do this, in the sense of maybe masking something that we could be missing. But we didn't know that. They didn't know that. My parents, and neither did I. And so on I went. I stayed on birth control for the next 9 years until I was 25 years old. And at 25, I needed to have a heart procedure done. And so the doctor asked that I would come off all the medication I was taking prior to that procedure. So off I went. I had the procedure done. And then a week or two after, I started to feel kind of funny. And I thought, gosh, I'm not feeling really good. And I was getting hot all the time. And I was starting to sweat at nighttime. And I was having headaches. And I was married at the time. And as anyone going through menopause knows, dryness set in. And so I was starting to have lots of dryness all over. And so I finally said, I think I need to go back to the doctor. So I went to the doctor at 25 and I said, I'm not feeling so good. I came in, and the only way I could describe it to the doctor was, I feel like I'm in menopause. And then I laughed. I remember wholeheartedly, almost belly laughing, thinking how funny it was that I was explaining my symptoms to the doctor that I was in menopause, and here I'm 25 years old. But they drew some labs, and I remember her opening up the door and walking back into that room, and just such a solemn look on her face. And she goes, well, Emily, I hate to tell you, but I actually do think you're in menopause, just early menopause. And I looked at her and I said, you've got to be kidding me. I was just joking. Like, I didn't mean that I was in menopause. And she goes, well, I know you maybe didn't think that, but you are. Your labs are showing that you have early menopause. And so she ended up sending me down to a specialist at the University of Iowa to fully diagnose me and to make sure that we weren't missing something else. And so I went down to that endocrinologist, I would say maybe 6 weeks later. And I had ultrasounds done, lab work done, and an assessment by the reproductive endocrinologist. And he came back in, and I'll never forget, it was a purple room. Purple is not my favorite color now. And I remember him sitting down and scratching on the back of like some crumpled paper he found. He started drawing what my ovaries technically looked like, which were nothing. They were non-existent raisins, essentially. And he said, we found the same thing that your doctor found, and you're just never going to have kids of your own.
That must have been crushing for you.
And that was all the conversation really was. It was very abrupt. It was very short. It wasn't, let me talk to you about what other options you have, which I do try to give a little bit of credit. We weren't actively trying to have children at that point, and it was an incidental finding. So I try to think that maybe he didn't do more work with us because we weren't actively trying to have children. But anytime you deliver the message that you're not going to have kids to a 25-year-old woman, some other information would be helpful. And so I left that day feeling completely shocked. I left in disbelief. I remember talking to my husband at the time saying, well, what are we going to do? I mean, I know we weren't trying to have kids, but now we can't have kids. So what does that mean? And what does that look like for our life? And it was a very scary place to be with very little resources at the time. And that was almost 15 years ago. And so even since then, so much about infertility and donor conception and everything has really evolved. So back 15 years ago, there wasn't a lot of support. And so leaving that moment and sitting there and talking, saying, what are we going to do, was something that, I'll never forget. And it felt like my life really just came to a halt. And I will say that even if you're not trying to have children, the minute someone tells you you can't have children, you feel like you need children right now. You feel like that's all your mission is to become a parent now. It's funny how that happens. And so we went on a journey to kind of just see what would happen. We kind of believed that adoption would be the way that we would go, because we didn't know of any other option. Nothing was presented to us. We were not aware of donor conception. We weren't even really aware of IVF, to be honest. It wasn't something that was ever talked about in either one of our lives. So it wasn't something on our radar. Shortly after that summer, we actually were approached by a young couple who were not married and they were pregnant. I think they were about 7 months pregnant. And they said, we're looking for a family to adopt our child because we are not together and we feel this would be best for our child. And so we met with them, we talked through everything and decided, okay, you know what? This is why Emily has this diagnosis, because we were meant to be ready for this child at this moment. And so this is why this happened when it did. And so I should note that my diagnosis is unexplained. So they have no reason of why I started early menopause, which at the time they called it premature ovarian failure. Now it's more labeled as premature ovarian insufficiency because there's more of a range. But at the time they had notated it as failure. But we just believe okay, this is why this happened. And so we went through the process. We had our home study done. We did all the things that you have to do to be prepared for a private adoption. And we were called on a Thursday night saying, okay, birth mom's going into labor. So I ran out of the hospital that I was working at, got in the car and drove to the town where they were delivering. And we got to the hospital before he was born. And then I remember the nurse opening the waiting room door and bringing in this little bundle of joy. And I was sitting there and they handed him to me and I was holding him just like this, just staring into his eyes, just telling him how excited I was to meet him and how much I already loved him and how I'd been praying to, that for this moment, and that I was just so in love with him and I was so excited to be his mom. And so we spent the next day and a half at the hospital with him. And then we were ready to take him home on Saturday. And we were getting some things loaded up in the car, and the social worker called and she said, Emily, I'm going to need you to not come back to the hospital because birth mom changed her mind. And so you need to come back. And so in Iowa at the time, birth moms had 7 days to change their mind, which we knew was a possibility. But through our experience, we just never believed it would happen.
That must have been heartbreaking.
I remember us getting in the car and driving back home to the city that we lived in with an empty car seat. And then when we got home, we came home to an empty nursery. And so I had to shut that door for a very long time before I went back into that nursery. Yes. And so through that event, it was something that taught me that I was going to be willing to do whatever it took to become a mother and whatever it looked like. And at that time, I didn't know what it would look like. I just knew that after experiencing a day and a half of pure joy and true love for a child, even though I didn't birth him, I loved him like my son for that day and a half. I knew that I was meant to be a mother and I just had to find a way to get there. And so another private adoption presented itself, and it wasn't something that my husband at the time could really go through. When you go through such a loss like that, it can really just tear you to the core and really just devastate you. And so unfortunately, something that a lot of times I don't think we talk about through infertility is the impact it has on our relationships. And so my marriage didn't survive that. My marriage did not survive the loss that we experienced. And then the understanding of what we each independently would do to become parents were dynamically different. Shortly after we parted ways, and at the age of 27, I found myself divorced, which I never thought would happen. And I found myself believing that I could never have children. And that's a really, really hard place to be as a 27-year-old.
Horrible. So what then caused you to leave this world of adoption and then move to donor conception?
I threw myself into work because what else was I going to do? I truly didn't believe I could meet someone ever again that would love me in spite of my story for, not being able to give them children of their own and my own. And the fact that I was divorced, it was just something that I just felt I was kind of a lost cause. So I focused on work. And then a few years later, I ended up meeting my husband now, and he is a physician. And so as we were kind of dating and getting to know each other, I wanted to share with him openly about my situation because I felt it was only fair because we were getting more serious. Not even inadvertently, randomly, he already knew of my story. Someone had shared with him about who I was and what my journey had brought. And he chose to take me on a date in spite of that. And so as we moved on in our dating life, he ended up looking at my medical records, which we always joke about, like, oh, what a pickup line. Like, let me look at your medical records. But in doing so, he told me, he goes, Emily, your ovaries are not working. You're right. Like they are non-existent, but your uterus is just fine. And I just started going off. I said, what good is a uterus? I said, I almost had a hysterectomy when I was 25 because I figured, heck, if I can't have kids, why do I need my uterus? And I thank God to this day that the doctor I went to when I was 25 to have a hysterectomy refused to do it, because had he done it, I would not be a mother today. Because he said, my husband said, Emily, your uterus is important because you can carry a child. You just need to use donor eggs. And I said, what are donor eggs? I had no idea. I was a nurse, but I wasn't in reproductive, nursing or medicine. And so I didn't know anything about the donor world, let alone IVF.
To everybody out there, I'm sorry to stop this because it's an amazing story. I just want to say something about this. So many of you out there know that I also had many failed adoptions in my process and miscarriages. And I think we don't always appreciate that, even if we get to the happy story, it comes with often so much loss before it. And very often people who use donor conception, sometimes they're single parents or gay couples, but very often there are people who've had some difficulty or struggled in some way. And so when you're approaching this, you're already very sore in many ways, right? And so I think that really speaks to your resilience, Emily. I mean, I'm sure this whole experience just kind of knocked you off your feet before you then met your next husband.
Yes, it did. The 2 years in between that time, I think sometimes I even kind of skip over it when I'm sharing the story because it was such a dark time. It was
Mm-hmm.
such a lonely time. It was a time where my self-worth was questioned. It was a
Yes.
time where I wondered, what did I do to deserve this? Or,
Mm-hmm.
if you're of faith of any sort, when you're a woman and your body is designed to have children and it's taken from you, essentially, you think, what am I being punished for?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why me? Why am
Right.
I being punished to not even be able to do something that is naturally supposed to happen, especially when your eggs are gone?
Mm-hmm.
It's more, for me, it was so hard because I learned more as I went through the process about PCOS and endometriosis and all of these other things that can pose, struggles. But for me, I struggled with the why my eggs? Why did you take my eggs from me? And that's how I looked at it for a very
Mm.
long time. I felt like someone had robbed me of my ability to motherhood. And
Yeah.
so it's a time where it's not pretty,
No.
you you go into a place that is dark, and it
Mm-hmm.
is a place where not many people know the depths of the pain that you go through with a loss of genetics
Yes.
and the loss of feeling like you're never going to be a mother, because at the time that's what I truly believed, and feeling
Right.
so unwanted. How do
Mm-hmm.
you tell someone, if you go on a date, how do you explain to them, like, hey, I'm really interested in you, but by the way, if you want a family, I'm
Mm-hmm.
probably not going to be able to help out with that when you're like the primary source of, baby making. So
Mm-hmm.
some days I don't even know how I made it through those couple of years. I look
Yeah.
back and I think I had no support in place. I didn't have any good coping mechanisms in place. The type of, like I said, social support that there is now for infertility that you can find on social media or, through different avenues was not present. And
Mm-hmm.
so I found that I was just kind of wandering around in the dark for a while.
Yeah.
And, I think what kept me going was not even the thought of motherhood per se, but just the fact that I'm just not a quitter. And so every day I got up and I found something to put my energy into at work, and I really focused on that. I did find myself journaling here and there, but I think I could have probably done a better job during that time. But I've learned a lot that I share now with Hopeful Mama in our support groups about journaling, that I learned through my own experience about feeling like things have to be perfect when really they don't when you journal. And so I've been
Mm-hmm.
able to share some of that in our lived experience. But it is something, I think you're right, Lisa, that we don't really allow ourselves to sometimes acknowledge the grief and the depth of the pain that sometimes you can experience with a miscarriage or a failed adoption, or even just closed doors that you have on your journey, that you have to get up and try again. And that resilience is something that we don't always acknowledge, but definitely with those going through infertility, I think they're some of the most resilient people I've ever met.
Yes. 100%. 100%. Yes. Yeah, I think it's incredible that you went through all that. And then you have to approach your next step kind of beaten up already, right? I'm sure the new relationship helped to invigorate you, but you're now starting all over again.
Yeah, definitely. And it's hard because my journey to donor conception, I do feel can be a lot different than many people, because sometimes donor conception, especially with egg donation, does generally come after trying with your own eggs for quite a long time. And I
Hmm.
didn't even get to try with my eggs. And so for me, when I learned about donor conception and I started researching and learning about all the ways that I could become a mother through that, it ignited a hope in me, because it
Mm.
wasn't my last resort. For me, it was my first option at now motherhood. And so for many people, when they view donor conception, I have heard frequently through our groups and just the people that I've met that, okay, well, I've tried all of these things, I've exhausted all these options. So now I'm going to consider donor conception as kind of a last resort. And for me, it's a little different than that. And I do try to encourage those who even have gone through all of their journey through using their own eggs and everything else to still try not to look at it as a last resort, because donor conception is a beautiful path. And
Hmm.
even though it may not have been what you envisioned or what you expected, it is fully worthy of your whole intent and all of your joy and happiness, because
Mm.
it it doesn't have to be viewed as, okay, well, this is the last thing I can try. And then other than that, I just don't know what I'm going to do, which I do know we can feel that way sometimes. But if
Hmm.
we can approach it with more of a hope, with an open heart of a new path, it can really shape your journey to be much different than viewing it kind of as, I have nothing else to try. And so for me, I share that a lot, that, it was the hope I was looking for. It was something that brought me so much joy to know that I had an opportunity to at least try to experience parenthood through pregnancy. I don't know if you want me to share more about getting to my girls
Yes.
yet, or if you have something else, but I could talk about it all day.
Yes, I want to hear about all of that, but I just also want to say that I think it's so interesting what you're saying, because being in a different place, right? Either feeling like you have no hope to have children and now all of a sudden you do is like, the bright side, right? Where people feel like this is the dark side for
Yeah.
them. But also, I think, which I'd love for you to share as you tell the story, there's so many aspects of this process. When you have children who are not genetically related to you, you have no idea what that's going to look like and
Mhm.
how you're going to feel, or how your children will feel about you. If people could only know that, I think it would be so much more helpful for them, because at least there is invigorated hope. At least they're feeling like there is a chance that I'm going to have all of these wonderful things. But you instead lay in bed awake at night thinking, am I going to be normal? Are kids going to like my kids? Am I going to feel connected when I look at my kid and this kid doesn't look like me? Is a kid going to feel connected to me? Are they going to look at the donor as a mom? I mean, I'm sure you've heard all these things before. So having that perspective, I think, really does help. So yes, please go on with the story. I'd love to hear more about it.
And one thing I want to mention before I forget to mention it, and then I'll tell you how I made it to motherhood. But I think you're so right. When you put so much emphasis on genetics, which happens when you lose the ability to use your genetics, it then becomes the main focal point, right? I can't use my genetics. So now what does genetics mean? Well, genetics means my child normally looks like me. Genetics means my child acts like me. Genetics means we have, we're related, like all of these things, right? Now become the focal point. And after being on the other side of parenting, two donor conceived children who are now 7 and 5, granted, I haven't lived a whole life with them yet, but for the years I have spent with them, the one thing I can tell you that I have learned beyond a shadow of a doubt is that genetics has been the least impactful thing on my parenting experience as a mother. And genetics has been the least impactful thing on my girls in our life. And that's not because I ignore it. That's not because I hide it. It's not because we don't talk about it. If anything, we talk about genetics more probably than the normal people.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think it's so important that they are well aware of their story and of our journey to meet them. But in that, even with that much sharing and that much talking about it, never once has the genetic side been a stepping block for us?
I've had the same experience because my children also are not genetically related to me. And although it's very important for them to understand their beginnings and for it to be part of our dialogue, it's not part of our lives on a day to day basis, right? We just get on with parenting. There's so many things to deal with when you're a parent of young children. So it's not front and center all the time. And we don't realize that, I think, when we first get into it.
It has just been the thing that has been the least important on the parenting journey. And I think if
Mhm.
people knew that up front, or if I would have even known that up front, it would ease a lot of anxieties because we put so much emphasis on the genetics, and really it ends up being one of the least things you talk about or that's
Mhm.
impactful in your day. And so I'm sure I'll probably talk more about that later, but it's just something that I have found true for our story, that motherhood is so much more than just genetics, even,
100%.
even when you talk about it all the time. So
Mhm. Imagine your beautiful future. You're snuggling with your child. You feel so connected to them. Your friends and family are so happy, and you have everything that you've ever wanted. I want this for you too, but I want more than that. I want you to feel secure knowing that you've made the best decisions, not just short term, but long term for your future family. Wherever you are on your journey, whether you're choosing a donor, choosing a clinic, learning how to talk to your donor conceived child about their origins, all of these decisions will have wider implications for your future. And I want you to have the right resources so you can feel empowered and confident at this very important time in your life. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to Building Your Family. It's the only expert-guided platform designed for parents and parents-to-be using reproductive medicine. We provide unique strategies that you won't find anywhere else to make your path to parenthood smoother and more informed. And that's why our approach is about offering practical and actionable steps that you can use right now. Whether you're just starting out or already deep into your process, Building Your Family is here to guide you with expert advice, specialized education, stress reduction strategies, and a community to support you every step of the way. We can't wait to see you inside.
to get to my girls, we found a clinic that was nearby in Chicago and felt really good about them. So we moved forward with them right after we got married. And then we started our first cycle at the end of December in 2016, and then did our first transfer with frozen. So we selected a donor that had frozen eggs. So we did a frozen egg transfer, or we used frozen eggs. And then we did our transfer in January of 2017. And then we were so blessed, which I did not know how blessed we were in that moment, because I did absolutely really no research into IVF or donor conception. But now, being where I am and have met the many people that I have met, I now realize how blessed we were that our first transfer was successful. And so that is Penelope, who was our 7-year-old.
It's so true, because so many people don't realize that donor conception is not 100%, right? We very often get into this feeling like everything else has failed and this is going to work, but it's not 100%, unfortunately.
That was just joyous. Like we couldn't even believe it, in the sense of, like, I remember thinking, if this doesn't work out, like, we'll figure something out. And then when it did happen, I was still a little ignorant to how lucky we really were, even though I felt like, wow, this is amazing. This worked and everything
Mhm.
went okay. And then when she was about almost 2 years old, we decided that we would try again. And so we still had eggs from our first donor. And so we tried again. And unfortunately, that cycle failed. We don't really have any really good reasons why, other than the embryos that we had just didn't grow to blast, and we still transferred, but it didn't work. It didn't take. And so at that point, I was at a really low place again. I was so blessed to be a mother, but I really wholeheartedly wanted to grow our family and give our oldest a sibling, but I was done compromising. And so I kind of fell into this pit again of, we're out of, genetically related eggs for my first child. And I always just wanted them to be fully genetically related, even if it wasn't my genes. If we could have them genetically related 100%, that's what I wanted. Well, when I realized that couldn't happen, I was like, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Like, I'm done. I've had to compromise all of these things up to parenthood. I've had to compromise how I got here. I had to compromise on so many things. I'm not going to compromise on this again. And so my husband although at the time I was very upset with him, looking back now, I'm so grateful that he did this, but he came and kind of gave me some tough love. And he said, "Oh, so you're just going to give up because you didn't get your way." And I thought, how rude. How
Well,
rude. How rude of you to say
hmm
that. But truly, that's what was happening, right? I was focusing so much on something that I always said didn't matter, which was genetics. And I was preventing us from growing our family and hopefully providing my daughter with a sibling because I wasn't getting my way about genetics, which I always said didn't really matter.
hmm
So if it didn't really matter, why was I then sitting in this like pit again of, well, since they're not fully genetic related, we can't move forward. Like, I'm sorry, we're just done. And so that I remember that moment when he said that to me, and it really just kind of gave me a good shake. And I thought, you know what? Why am I putting so much emphasis on this thing that has not impacted my mothering to my child in one way, shape, or form? Why would it impact their relationship? Because I was so worried it would impact their relationship, right? Like
hmm
they would be half siblings essentially. And then how would that play out as they got older? And, would they look completely different and would they act completely different? And like, what am I going to do? And so we then went back to our clinic and we found another donor that we were really interested in. Funny enough, I actually called the clinic after I reviewed her profile and I said, "Are you sure these two aren't related in some way, shape, or form? Like, are they distant cousins or something?" Because it was eerily how similar they were in so many aspects. And the clinic said, no, they just happen to have a lot of similarities in many ways. And so we ended up selecting that donor and then did our third cycle or third transfer, and that was successful. And so now we have our 5-year-old who is Everly. And so it is definitely a story of, again, overall, my mothering journey is not anything I expected. It wasn't anything I envisioned. It wasn't anything I planned out on paper. And even through that journey, I had to make compromises and I had to look at, like two roads, and which road am I going to take? Am I going to take the one where it leads nowhere? Or am I going to take the one and have an open heart that, it's okay that we're going to have two different donors and it's okay that they're not going to have, fully related genetics. Like it's okay. And we're just going to go down this path and see what happens. And again, being on the other side and seeing who they are and what they look like and how they act. I'm learning even more today that genetics there's so much more to parenting, to being siblings. Like they learn from each other. They learn from me every day. And it's a beautiful story that we have with our donors. And we talk about how important their role is in their life and who they are. But also how beautiful it is that I could still contribute to them through their day to day as their mother.
Wonderful. That's so wonderful. What a beautiful story. So, do you think, because I think this happens with people in general, I think donor conceived children have expressed things like this, and I think people using donor conception, sometimes when you have other feelings, like maybe in this situation that you're describing, you had so many years of feeling like, you go down a road and a door is closed. You go down another road, a door is closed. Like you kept on having that. Maybe you were feeling like up to here with it by the time this last experience happened. And that was conflated with the genetic issue. It wasn't really about the genetic issue.
Picking our second donor.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard. If I try to think honestly and openly about what truly was the issue, was it that I had so many closed doors and roadblocks that I was just done with another one? I just wanted it to go easy for me, right? I just wanted
Yeah.
one thing to just go
Yes.
the way I hoped or thought.
Of course.
I mean, of course, 100%, I would say that there was definitely those feelings, but I still feel there was a concern initially without being on the other side of the fact of, I'm going to have two potential children that are not going to have, full genetics that are the same. And what will that look like? And that was something that I think in retrospect, was that the biggest issue? Probably not. I think the biggest issue was I'm done getting told no. I'm done having the doors closed. I'm done having to go on a detour. I'm done with all of that. And so in those moments, it is sometimes almost easier to just give up because you're just so tired. You're so exhausted. Tired. You're so just, you've cried too many tears in the shower. You've cried too many days in the dark room, and you want it to be done. And so you think, well, if I just, stop here, I can't be disappointed anymore. But thank God I didn't do that.
It's amazing that you didn't because God knows, I mean, it would certainly make sense for you to just to say, I've had enough. Like, how much can a person take, right? I mean, it's just so much to be able to handle. And it's tough because we know the number one reason why people stop treatment is because of stress. And yet it's so hard for us to kind of understand that the stress is contributing to so many of these decisions and so many of our feelings and so many of our observations about all of this. And it is true. I mean, if we kind of look around the world, we can see siblings that are genetically connected and don't get along or, are not like each other or don't look like each other. And yet, when it comes to our own children, it doesn't occur to us, right?
Yeah, so much so. I mean, I have shared that a lot on my personal Instagram account because so many times people comment on my daughter's looks and people online say, "Well, do you tell them that you used a donor?" And I said, "Well, no, not generally, because there is a part of me that did contribute to who they are and how they act
Hmm.
and how they are
Hmm.
expressing who they are." And so I acknowledge that and I accept the part that I played in their life. And so, I think that sometimes going down the donor conception path, sometimes I think, again, as I mentioned, we are so fearful of what we don't know, and we're so fearful of what other people might think, or all these things that we can't really put, our finger on because we haven't experienced it, but they end up being unfounded fears. And so I talk a lot about that in support groups, how sometimes we fear things that are, as we look into them and we dive more into them, we find out, gosh, this isn't founded on any truth at all. There's no truth to support this. And once we discover that, we can really let go of that fear because it's not founded in truth. Whereas if we do dive into a fear and we find it's founded in truth, then okay, we can put some weight to that. But if
Hmm.
you go there and find that there's nothing there, well then release that. Let yourself go of the weight that you carry of that fear when you know that it's not founded in truth.
Yes, so important. And that's why it's so great that you started this foundation. I really want to hear about that too. But could you first tell us a little bit about how your feelings have evolved about what you mentioned, talking to your kids, talking to other people about using a donor, if you and your husband were always on the same page, and how you manage those conversations out in the world?
Sure. So try to start from the beginning. So were my husband and I always on the same page? I would say yes. And the reason being is my husband was very, I don't even know the right word. He was so great in this side of things because he never once made me feel like I wasn't good enough. He never once made me feel like I wasn't adequate. And so, as we were going through the donor selection process and just the process in general, he never treated me differently. He always let me really lead with the selection process because he said, you're the one who's carrying the baby and you're the one who is kind of the missing part in this. And so I want you to be able to lead with what you feel is best for you and for, our child. And so I'm so grateful for that because I know that the route of donor conception can create a lot of stress alone. And then
Hmm.
even in relationships can be very difficult, especially selecting donors and making sure you guys are on the same page about, who you're picking, why you're picking them. And so, yes, I would say for us, I was very, very blessed in the fact that that was an easy thing for us. He really let me lead the way and was very supportive. And when I went to select a donor, I initially was getting frustrated because I couldn't find anyone that looked like me. At the time, I had bleach blonde hair because I used to bleach my hair. I have since learned not to do that, but I couldn't find anyone that looked like me. And I was so frustrated. I kept saying, gosh, I can't find anyone that looks like me. Like, what are we going to do? And he goes, well, maybe you should consider finding someone who acts like you because I'm Indian. He goes, I have very dominant genes, more than likely. So what you look like probably isn't going to matter, even if we could use your genes.
Hmm.
So maybe you should consider how they act. And it was like a light bulb went off. And I started then looking through all of the profiles and reading their psychosocial profiles and seeing how they acted. How did they view family? How did they view their friends? What did they do when they were sad? What did they do when they were happy? And I found someone who had similarities of my characteristics of my personality, which I found would be way more important than what my hair color was or what my eye color
Hmm.
was. So that was really great. He was really, really supportive in that. In regards to talking to my children about donor conception, I am a huge advocate that you start early and you start often. And
Hmm.
I'm not sure where that came from. I think it probably came from the fact that I am just a very honest person. In my younger years, I would say when I was first struggling with infertility, and even before that, and it's not something I'm proud of, but I wasn't the most honest person. I found myself sometimes telling white lies to allow people to feel better, and I didn't want to hurt their feelings. And I kind of was trying to guard other people. And as I've gone through this process, I've become unapologetically myself and so much more honest with myself and with others about how I feel and why I'm making decisions. And so I think when my children were born, I realized like I just need to be honest, and I need to be like honest from the get-go, because I never wanted them to feel that they were a secret or something I was ashamed of, or, the journey to them and their conception was something that I was shameful of, because I wasn't. I
Hmm.
was so excited to be their mom. And so I started early. I got books that I would just read to them because I didn't know, like, how am I going to tell them this? How am I going to not make this seem weird? And how do you talk about conception to a young child so that they just grow up knowing this is their story? And so I guess I didn't meet her, but through social media, I came across Happy Together by Julie Marie. And it was just a book that I fell in love with about this little bear family. And so I just read it as I was, feeding my baby. I would just read it over and over and over. And then I found more books. So then I read those books. And by the time my oldest was 2 years old, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I told her the story through books and through me just kind of saying it. And she had no idea. For 2 years, she had no idea what I was talking about. So I had 2 years of practice under my belt before she really started to kind of get an idea of what I was talking about. And each kid is different. I found through both of my children, my oldest, she started really grasping some of the concepts right about like 2.5, 3 years old. And then my second one, she's 5. She still doesn't even really have a clue what we're talking about and what's going on. And so it's really child dependent. Some people say, well, how soon should you tell them? And can they really understand this early? I say it doesn't hurt, right? My 5-year-old, she doesn't really know, so we don't push it, but at least she knows the verbiage that we're talking about. It's not like a new story
Hmm.
that she's never heard of. We talk about it through the books that we read. Anytime my older one might bring up something about how she acts or what she likes, I always try to reincorporate the fact of, well, who else played a part in why you're this way? Because she'll say, oh, I'm like this because of daddy, and I'm like this because of you, mommy. And I'll say, well, there's one other person that played a really important role in who you are. And who is that? Oh, yeah, my donor. And I was like, yep, we don't want to forget about her because
Hmm.
he played such an important role. So there's lots of like everyday ways that I kind of just bring it full circle to our family. And, sometimes people give me a hard time that I might talk about it a little too much, but I would rather share it in the ways that come up organically versus me trying to like force the issue when they're older and say, we have to sit down and talk about this.
Yes.
Whereas now they just grow up knowing that this is their story and it's beautiful.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
think I covered talking about it in public or to other people. I don't generally just lead with, oh, hey, by the way, I use donor conception, and so my children are not genetically related to me. I don't normally lead with that.
Hmm.
However, if it is someone that we're having, an active conversation, or we've known them for a little bit, but they don't know about our story, and let's say they comment on, something about the girls, or ask just more in-depth questions, I do openly share about our journey, and that has become more comfortable for me. And I kind of just read the situation to see if it's more appropriate. And sometimes it's not, and I just say, oh, thanks, or whatever. But I have found that the more that I share about our journey, even if someone else hasn't experienced infertility or donor conception specifically, I am spreading awareness about all of the diverse ways that families are created. And that's really important, that we allow the ways that families are created to be more talked about and aren't something that people shy away from having those conversations. And so I hope that as I share my story, that they become more comfortable to hear other people's stories as well.
And how do your girls feel about you telling other people? Do they, or maybe they're still too young, but do they have opinions about it?
It's interesting. So when we talk about it, if it happens to be like out in public with maybe somebody, they generally happen to tell their side of the story. They really like to talk about, like, especially specifically my older one will talk about how her donor is, a part of her life. And so they will share a little bit about their part of it. But I haven't specifically asked them like, oh, do you feel uncomfortable if mommy talks about this? Or do you feel uncomfortable if we, say X, Y, or Z? Those aren't conversations we've had yet. But I do think that as they get older, it probably is a subject that we will broach to say, this is your story just as much as mine. And so you get to be able to be a part of that and to say what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. And so I think that will probably come as they get a little bit older. But one thing people have asked is, oh, well, does your kid go to school and then talk about their conception? Because that would be really weird. Well, no. Does any kid go to school and talk about how they were conceived? No, they don't. So just like a kid who was conceived naturally doesn't talk about it, neither do my children. They just are aware that they had extra help, but it's not something that is ever brought up in situations like at school where they have to feel awkward or different than their classmates.
And I find that even when kids do bring it up, just like you're saying, genetics is not the biggest part of your life with your children. It's usually not the biggest part of their life with their friends either. So even if they say, oh, yes, my mom used a donor, they say, okay, fine, now let's go to the playground. Or, they have some other agenda, right? It's not like something that's earth shattering for them usually, but parents do worry about those sorts of things. And I think they worry about, well, are other people going to have fears or concerns like I once had? That maybe they're worried for me that my kids are not connected. And lots of people do say things that are inappropriate. So I do think sometimes people really worry about that. But I think once you're a mom, you feel much more strong in your sense of self and your sense of parenthood. And I feel like you have less insecurity about your role as a mom, right?
I think so. And I think that comes regardless, right? Like as a first time mom, you're terrified of so many things. You don't know about so many things. And so I feel like just as you gain your confidence as a mom in general, you also gain confidence and accept the part that you played even through like donor conception. And I think as the time goes on, yeah, you do. You get more comfortable, you get more confident. And I think you learn your children. And so you learn what works for them, right? And what they're comfortable with. And you won't really know that until you get to know your child. And that's a huge part of how we live our life, is getting to know our children.
That's so nice. That's beautiful. I really think that that's such a fantastic way to really understand what's important here. It's knowing your children, getting to know them as individuals, because everybody's different, right? Everybody's temperament's different, even if you're in the same family. And that's, I think, the most beautiful thing. So, Emily, will you tell us also a little bit about how you started this foundation and what it's like and how people can find out about it?
Definitely. So Hopeful Mama came as kind of an abstract idea when my oldest was about 6 weeks old. I was holding her and it was overcome with just pure emotion, but also a little bit of grief, in the sense of I realized that so many women in my position would potentially not get to experience this moment of holding their baby because they either had a lack of education like I did until I met my husband, a lack of resources, which I had for a very long time, or a lack of support either emotionally or financially. And I was just so overcome by the fact that how could someone not get the opportunity to experience this just absolute joy? And so I didn't know it then, but it really planted a seed in my heart to want to give back in some way and to ensure that other women similar to my journey would know about the options that they had, would be supported, would have the education, and would be financially supported to do this. And so then fast forward until 2023. So my oldest would have been 6 years old and in school. And so I was talking with my husband about going back to the bedside as a nurse. And, we were trying to decide if that's what I should do. And he goes, the kids still are young and they still really need you. And I work far away. So, what if you did that thing that you've been talking about here and there? And I thought, well, what is that thing? Like, what even is, what is it? And so I started at the beginning of 2023 in January, I started really searching deep inside of what is this thing? What is this this feeling that I've had inside. And the name Hopeful Mama just kept coming back to me and coming back to me and just reminding me how hopeful I was to be a mom and the hope that I had inside of me, that on days that I felt like I had no hope left, somehow hope carried me through. And what was that? Like, what carried me when I couldn't carry myself anymore? And it was hope. And it might have been a tiny little light that barely lit the way, but it was enough to let me keep moving forward. And so that's really where Hopeful Mama's name came from. And then I started learning about what it was to be a nonprofit. And so I did all of that work. And then we launched in April of 2023 during National Infertility Awareness Week. And we started out to support women on their infertility journey. And so we do that through 3 different ways. We provide in-person and virtual support groups. So our in-person groups right now are in Iowa, but we do hope to get more in-person groups throughout the country. But right now they're in Iowa, in Cedar Rapids area, and the Des Moines area. And then our virtual support groups are open to anyone, whether you're in the US or not in the US. We've had people join us from all over the world, which has been really exciting to see Hopeful Mama extend that way. So we have a donor conception support group. It meets on the 3rd Thursday of every month at 6 p.m. Central Time via Zoom. And so you can register through our website for that. And I currently lead that as a parent of a donor conceived children. And so I lead that. And then we have a virtual group on Monday that is every 2 weeks that people can join. And then we also provide education, because I know through my journey, my parents weren't educated that infertility could start so early. I wasn't educated enough about my body that something was wrong other than just going on birth control. And so we hold quarterly educational workshops that cover women's health, mental health related to infertility, and then fertility related things. And we offer those in person and virtual as well. And then the third way is our financial grant. And so every year in April, we open the Hopeful Mama grant cycle. And so that is open to women who have an infertility diagnosis, and they can apply for financial assistance to support them in their treatment. And so in our first year, we were able to open our grant cycle and we awarded $7,500 our first year. And then this last year, we just awarded 2 recipients and we were able to award $15,000 in grants. And then we're on track, hopefully, to do about $30,000 next year in grants.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, those are the ways that we support women. And honestly, those 3 pillars are really from my personal journey: the lack of resources of support, the lack of education, and then just the financial aspect.
So important, Emily. So important. And it's so wonderful that you've been so thoughtful and so giving of your heart and your time and your energy. This is not a small undertaking. So I really appreciate everything that you're doing out there. Can you share with the audience how people can reach you and how they can apply for grants, and what do they need to do in order to be an applicant?
Yeah, definitely. So on our website, it's www.hopefulmamafoundation.org. And we have a Hopeful Mama grant page. So you can just click on that and it'll tell you right now our grant cycle is closed. So there isn't as much information as when it's open, but you can go down and see what's covered, what's not covered, and some eligibility requirements, which the nitty gritty is basically you need to be a woman diagnosed with infertility living within the US, like a US citizen. And then there's some other things, but that's the main thing. And then our grant cycle opens on April 1st each year. So the cycle will open April 1st of 2026. And you can just go right on our website and you can apply right there. And something that I'm really proud of with Hopeful Mama is a few things. So we will never have an application fee. The reason being is so many women are already spending so much money on treatment that having to pay an application fee for a chance at a grant when you're already paying for a chance at a baby just didn't sit well with me. And so I told our board of directors that I just never wanted to have an application fee, and we just never will, so that it is accessible to all women to at least apply for a chance for funding and not have to be financially impacted by that, because that's not something that we want to have happen. So we never have an application fee. So it doesn't hurt to apply. And we do not have a BMI restriction or an age restriction. And our grant page is our application is about one page on our website, whereas many other grants are pages and pages and pages and pages and pages.
Yes.
We have tried to make it very short and sweet. We've tried to make sure that we get the information that we need, but again, make it accessible to all to apply. And so that it's not taking you months and months and months to apply for this grant. So again, that opens April 1st, and we share it all over social media. So if you're on Instagram, you can follow us. It's at Hopeful Mama Foundation. And then we'll share out when those open. And then again, on our website, it's just on our grant page. And then you can reach us either through, again, social media, our website, or me personally. My Instagram handle is at Emily M. Patel. And I'm on there, sharing about our journey and our story. And I'm always open to answer questions or chat about things. But those are the best ways to get a hold of us.
Great. That's great. And it sounds so wonderful. And again, your process is so thoughtful, Emily. I really do appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone out there appreciates that as well, because whether or not they get a grant, they know you're out there and they have more hope that there are options for them, right? And as you said, there weren't options, and I didn't have options either when I was going through it. And you're making the world better. So I really appreciate what you're doing. And I hope everybody out there, you're listening to all this and taking notes and understanding that you're not alone, understanding that you can get through all of these things. And with the support, you may not give up. You may continue to have the hope that Emily is talking about. And we do hope that you're able to get that, because parenting, if you want it, is a beautiful thing. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your time. Please press subscribe if you like this episode. It really means a lot to us, and I will see you next week. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this was helpful to you. And if you'd like more personalized support, more information, and more education, you can find it in the show notes under the Building Your Family community. We'd love to see you inside. And if you were interested in today's topic, you will really like this video.